Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Shearholtz from NASA's Office of Communications here at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Welcome to today's briefing about the status of SpaceX's 7th commercial resupply servicing mission to the International Space Station. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket experienced a problem after liftoff at 10:21 a.m. Eastern Time. Hans Koenigsmann, Vice President of Mission Assurance for SpaceX, is leading the investigation. To discuss today's events are, on the phone, Gwen Shotwell, President and Chief Operating Officer at SpaceX. Via video conference from NASA headquarters, Bill Gerstenmaier, Associate Administrator of NASA's Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate. Here in the room with me is Michael Safradini, NASA's International Space Station Program Manager. And joining us by phone is Pam Underwood, Deputy Division Manager at the Federal Aviation Administration's Operations Integration Division. We'll begin with some opening remarks from each participant. We'll then take a few questions. We'll start with reporters here in the room, and then media who have joined us by the phone. For those dialed in, when it's your turn to ask your question, please limit it to one. Please state your name and your affiliation and to whom you're addressing your question. To get into the queue to ask a question, please dial *1 on your phone. We'll go ahead and begin with Gwen Shotwell.
Good afternoon. As Stephanie mentioned, Falcon 9 lifted off today for the 7th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station at 10:21. Liftoff was successful. First stage flight was successful. Up until 139 seconds into that flight, we experienced an anomaly, which led to a failure of the mission. We are obviously collecting data right now and will be for the next few hours. What I can tell you at this point is the first stage flight remained nominal. We do not expect this to have been a first stage issue. We saw some pressurization indications in the second stage, which we'll be tracking down and following up on there. We did receive telemetry from Dragon after the event as well. So we'll be continuing to monitor all the data that we collect to identify the issue that we experience, fix it, and get back to flight. Just so everybody understands, all the processes, protocols, and procedures were followed with respect to safety of the public as well as the mission participants. We've received no indication and expect no indication of any safety issues at all. So I look forward to your questions and hope to answer any that I can at this point.
Thank you, Gwen. We'll now move over to Bill Gerstenmaier.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Gwen. Again, this is a tough day. This is not where I really wanted to be on a Sunday afternoon, but spaceflight's not easy, as we've described to you before, and especially I think this points out the difficulty of and the challenges we face in spaceflight. We started with the orbital loss last fall and had the Progress loss several months ago, and now the SpaceX loss. And there's really no commonality across these three events other than the fact that it's space and it's difficult to go fly. We're essentially operating systems at the edge of their ability to perform and operate. This is a very demanding environment, requires tremendous precision and tremendous amount of engineering skill and hardware to perform exactly as it should. The SpaceX team and the ISS team performed extremely well today. They did everything exactly right. They continued to stay focused. They continued to monitor the ascent. They continued to monitor activities and make sure that there was no impacts to the public or to anyone else. The space station crew is fine on orbit. Again, through a testimony to the space station team, they've done a tremendous job of balancing all the consumables on orbit. We're in good shape from a food standpoint, from a water standpoint. We need to watch a multi-filtration bed that purifies water. There was a replacement bed on this flight, and we'll have to watch the water levels, and Mike and his teams will do that. Again, this is a blow to us. We lost a lot of important research equipment on this flight. We lost the IDA, the docking adapter that we had planned to set us up for later. Again, we'll be able to recover from that. We lost a spacesuit. Again, we'll see how we can recover from that, and we lost a lot of research. So again, it's a pretty important loss to us, or it's I don't want to minimize the loss to us, but again, from a macro level standpoint, the crew's in no danger. We're moving forward. The teams are ready to support. Mike can fill you in on the details when he gets a chance to talk here in a minute and show you that we're in good shape. But again, the teams have really prepared for this event. You know, we have a Progress launch scheduled on July 3rd. I intend that launch will occur on time. We've reviewed that flight in detail. We understand the differences associated with that flight from the recent Progress failure. They've essentially replaced the third stage of the rocket with an older configuration that's flown with Progress before. Mike and the teams have reviewed that in detail. The engineering teams at NASA have reviewed that, so we're ready to go with the Progress flight on July 3rd. We have an upcoming Soyuz flight with crew at the end of the month, end of July. July 23rd. We're still working through that flight readiness process. We'll continue to review that. I don't anticipate that flight being impacted by this event, by the loss of the SpaceX flight, but we still have some work ahead of us to go ahead and make sure that the Progress flight loss didn't couple into the crew flight. So we still have some open work there. We have not done yet our flight readiness review, but this loss will not impact the crew flight. Then there's a Japanese flight later in the summer, and then there's an orbital flight towards the end of the year. And so Mike and the teams will look at all those and figure out the right way to manifest things and move things around. We have sufficient research. We have sufficient consumables on orbit that the crew is safe and things are fine. So again, from a macro level standpoint, this is what we anticipated. I think I've talked to you before about, we expected through the commercial cargo program we would lose some vehicles. I did think we would lose them all in a 1-year time frame, but we have. I think there's no negligence here. There's no, really problem with this. It just shows the challenges that we have facing engineering and the challenges of spaceflight in general. So the teams will work through this. We'll learn from these events, and I think we'll get stronger from these events. We'll understand what occurred. We'll understand where there were engineering weaknesses. We'll get a chance to see these. The teams will learn from these. They'll take that learning forward. They'll get back ready to go fly, and we'll go back flying again. So the important thing is we stand down just long enough to understand the failure, to internalize the learning, and to move forward. So again, an unfortunate event, but I think it's important for all of us to realize that through these failures and through these events, we can learn more and we can come back stronger and we can get prepared to really keep pushing the envelope as we move into space. It's not easy living on the frontier of space. It's not easy taking care of space station. I think sometimes folks think it's easy and it seems routine, and that's when we get in trouble. It is not easy and it is not routine. The evidence of these last 3 flights have really shown us the problems that can occur, but it also shows the resilience. If a teams plan ahead and they work ahead, they can be ready to go support. So again, I look forward to your questions, and again, I want to thank the teams for the excellent work today, for being focused, for doing the right things from a safety standpoint, and making sure the public was okay, and making sure that the space station crew on orbit stayed in good shape. So thank you.
Thank you. Michael Suffredini?
I don't have a whole lot to add to what Bill just said. It is a disappointing loss. However, we managed the International Space Station to be able to get through these types of incidents. As Bill said, we've always assumed that we would lose a vehicle every so often. Space flight is very hard. Getting to low Earth orbit is extremely challenging, and it does challenge the systems that fly into low Earth orbit every time they go. So we expect that. Of course, having 3 this close together is not what we'd hoped for. However, fortunately, we had put ourselves in a position prior to even the orbital flight where we had quite a bit of logistics on board to support the crew, and that's helped us through this period and will continue to help us through this next challenge. On board this particular vehicle was the docking adapter that we talked about pre-launch, and the comm system associated with that. The good news is we have a second docking adapter ultimately the radio system has 2 radios, and so we only flew 1 each on this flight, and so those are available. So we will be able to continue to press towards the docking system on board ISS and to support the commercial crew program when they come online. In addition to that, we have, as Bill said, the Progress Fix and Fly will have a lot of crew logistics, food and water and provisions. They're trying to get their supplies back up to a higher level, and so that in turn will drive the logistics up for the entire ISS. And so that's in pretty good shape. So as Bill said, when you look forward from a logistics standpoint, you have the HTV vehicle, which we'll talk to our JAXA colleagues about any adjustments we need to make there. We have the orbital flight, which was due in December. We might be able to pull that up a little bit. We will be able to continue to crew at 6. We will provide provisions on board, but in addition to that, I still expect to fly quite a bit of research and keep the research going. And this is challenging for those folks that fly with us. We have been working very hard to get the external community to understand that ISS is available and the things you can do on board ISS. And so I know this loss is a big deal. You know, we had quite a few student experiments on this flight. And so I know that's a significant impact to them, and it'll be a challenge for them. This loss will certainly be a challenge for them. But you know, this is also a learning experience for those students and for all of us. It's you know, it's not whether you stumble or fall. It's whether or not it's what you do after you stumble and fall that's going to define success and greatness. So we will all pick ourselves up. We'll watch the SpaceX team, I'm sure, sort through this anomaly and figure out the cause and get back to flying. Meanwhile, we're in a good position on board ISS in terms of continuing to house the crew, continue to protect the schedule going forward, continue to do research. Without a doubt, we have lost some research hardware that we'll have to recover. We've clearly lost some significant hardware for ISS that we'll have to recover at some point, and we'll do that, and we'll get on with flight in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station. So this is a big loss. I don't want to underplay that, but I do want everyone to know that as a program, we manage this in a way to keep us healthy, and we'll pick ourselves up and get onto the next flight and continue to do research on board ISS. So as the next few weeks go by and we learn a little bit about what SpaceX figures out from the cause and what our other options are on our other vehicles, we'll let folks know how we adjust. But we will. You can expect that we will adjust some of our flights here in the future to make sure that we have all the supplies we need on board ISS. But we will continue to do research during that period as well. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go back to the phones where we have Pam Underwood from the FAA.
Thank you, Stephanie. For everyone's awareness, this activity was being conducted under an FAA launch license. So according to the information that we currently have, this is being classified as a mishap. That means that going forward, the investigation will be conducted, the mishap investigation will be conducted by SpaceX with FAA oversight. We currently have safety inspectors that are on site right now and monitoring the activities. We will continue this as SpaceX continues to work through their investigation. That's all we have from the FAA at the present time, but I do look forward to any questions that some may have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of you. We'll take some questions here in the room first, and then we'll get to the questions on the phone. Again, if you want to ask a question on the phone, please dial *1 to get into the queue, and please limit your question to one each. State your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We'll start here in the room with Irene Klotz.
Thanks, Stephanie. Irene Klotz with Reuters. For Gwen, you guys have been pushing really hard to get your launch rate up, and also recently had that huge success of getting certified for Air Force flights. Can you talk a little bit about what impact you think this might have, and if there's anything kind of at first brush that you can see was done differently for this flight that you've done for your 18 successful previous flights? Thanks.
Sure, Irene. There's nothing that stands out as being different for this particular flight that we've done for other flights. I don't want to speculate as to what it's going to take to get back to flight because we don't yet know. We haven't pinpointed exactly what happened yet. However, we're certainly in an extraordinary position to know what happened, to find what happened, to fix what happened, and to get back to flight, given the fact that the majority of this launch vehicle and all its components are ours, so we don't have to go through legal and contracts, negotiations, and discussions to get data on any components. We own it all. I'm sure we'll find it rapidly, and we'll get back to flight as soon as we safely and reliably can. By the way, I did want to extend a thanks to all the folks at NASA and the Air Force. Everybody's reached out offering help, and I certainly wanted to acknowledge that and thank everybody. And we'll certainly take you up on it if we can leverage that.
Okay, thanks. James Dean.
Thanks. James Dean, Florida Today. Gwen, can you tell us how this event might affect your progress moving forward with commercial crew? And are you concerned about it shaking people's confidence in that strategy?
So it's both Bill and Mike mentioned, this is a tough business. Any launch provider has to have considered this in their operational plans going forward. So I don't anticipate this to impact any program that we have ongoing. We must find the cause of the failure. We must fix it. And obviously we're going to get back to flight. We'll also, it's a reminder. It's not a great reminder, but it's a reminder nonetheless of how difficult this is. And we will pour even more effort into looking at every other possible source of issues in the future. We don't want to have dodged a bullet in the past and then only to get bitten again. So this doesn't change our plans. Our customers have always been loyal. We let them see how we operate. They're very confident in our technical team and our operations team. So it's a hiccup. It's certainly a time to take to pause and make sure we're doing everything we need to do. But no, I don't anticipate any significant changes.
And we have some additional comments from Mr. Gerstenmaier.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, again, one of the advantages of the overall program is, we can learn from this event on cargo. Well, although it's unfortunate, it's still recoverable, and we can understand what occurred with the SpaceX team, and this information can be really important as we move forward into the crew designs and flights. So we can understand if there's a problem or a concern, what occurred, and when we get that data, we'll see if it impacts crew. But it gives us a chance to learn in an environment where we can tolerate a little more risk, that's in the cargo environment, and then apply that into the crew environment. So again, I think this shows the overall strength of the strategy we have moving forward. It's good to gain experience with the providers in an environment where you can take a little risk and understand, but then if a failure occurs, you can then learn from that failure and make sure that it doesn't occur and take it out of the crew program before you get to the crew program. So I don't think this really impacts much our strategy for crew, but I think it also shows us how by continuing to fly, we can learn from these flights and learn things and learn hard lessons and apply them to crew and make sure we're really ready and really safe when it's time to go fly crew to space station.
Hey, Morgan Spurlock, CNN. I think today does reinforce everyone not only how difficult but potentially dangerous space travel can be. So, Bill, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Do you see this impacting the timeline that you have for the crew transport program? Right now the current timeline is 2017. I understand that, you do look at this as a chance to learn from what happened today, but right now we're 2 years out. Do you think that timeline will be affected?
Again, I think it's too early to really make those discussions about if it's going to affect the timeline or not. I don't anticipate it'll affect the timeline, and we'll understand what the failure was. When we see what the failure is, we'll see if it impacts. But this learning can actually kind of expedite things. We can actually learn from this failure, understand a weakness or a flaw in the design that we might not have seen for a while, and so this could maybe actually lower some of the speculation about how we want to move forward and how we want to work on the crew design. So at this point, I don't think there's any impact at all to the overall crew development timeline through the December 2017 kind of activity, and we'll keep moving forward with that. But I think the first thing is we'll let the SpaceX team and the FAA team and the NASA team take a look at this failure, understand what occurred, and then take that learning and apply it directly to crew. And at this point, I don't anticipate it impacting the schedule. In fact, it could help us to nail down designs and move forward.
We'll take another question in the room, then go to some of the questions on the phone.
Thank you. Daryl Nail, Fox Orlando. Mike, get your reaction about the students who had experiments going on this flight that were destroyed in Wallops, Virginia, then rebuilt them, and then had them destroyed again in Cape Canaveral here.
And I tried to touch on that a little bit earlier. It's also true for all of us, right? So these young people are learning a valuable lesson, I think, that not only is going to certainly apply in spaceflight, but it applies in life as well, that you do have setbacks, but they can be recovered from. You just keep trying. We have the same thing. We've on Orb 3 and on this flight, we had crew provisions on Orb 3 and on the Progress flight, we had crew provisions for the upcoming crew that have both been lost, and those are relatively inexpensive, and we'll fly those again. We had multi-filtration beds for water processing that we've lost on the orbital and on this flight now. That's a setback for us. But as I said, it's really what you do after you've had to face adversity that really defines what you're going to be able to do, and I think that's a really important lesson for these kids. So we'll help them get back online. We'll help them with their getting their hardware built again, and we'll get them to orbit, and we'll do their experiments, and hopefully this will be a positive lesson for them in the end. But it's a big impact, and it's hard on them. I know because it's hard on me.
Okay. Our first question on the phone is from Alan Boyle of MSNBC.
Thank you. I guess this would be a question for Pam, perhaps for Gwen, and it has to do with the FAA role in the investigation. Does this mean that SpaceX would have to stand down from all future Falcon 9 flights, or can those proceed? What would the timeline generally be for this sort of investigation, and will the FAA have to sign off before the next step is taken, whatever that is? Thank you.
How about if I start? This is Gwen, and I'll have Pam pick up the remaining. So given this is a mishap, SpaceX, per our license, SpaceX is in charge of the anomaly investigation. We will obviously leverage the help and support of the FAA, as I mentioned earlier, NASA, and the Air Force as well. Once we do identify the issues, we will submit that documentation to the FAA, and it will be considered prior to the next flight. I don't have a timeline for that right now. It certainly isn't going to be a year. I imagine a number of months or so, but again, I don't want to speculate. Pam, is there anything I missed?
No, Gwen, thank you. I completely agree with everything you said. Being conducted under an FAA license, SpaceX will have the responsibility to inform us, give us a report, a final report of their findings. Of course, we'll be participating and overseeing the mishap investigation along the way, as SpaceX has already told us that they would do in their license application. So I think you framed it up well, process going forward, and I, too, can't speculate on time frame. You know, the important thing is that this investigation is done proper, and going forward, we look forward to working with SpaceX on that.
Next question also is from the phone, Seth Borenstein from the Associated Press.
Yes, thank you for doing this. I guess this is for Gerst more than anyone. Can you expand a little on the thinking of why at the moment you're not looking at delaying, again, the July crew launch? I mean, given that you've had 3 consecutive supply failures, what would it take to make you decide to that it's safe to launch, or alternatively, what would make it you decide that it needs to be delayed? Thank you.
Again, I'll start the response, and then I think Mike can add some details on top of it. Again, I think when we look at the overall consumable standpoint on station, we're good from a food and water standpoint, basic living supplies. We also have a good amount of research on orbit. And in fact, we're kind of in a situation where we could actually benefit from additional crew being on orbit. There's a shortage of research time available for our crews to actually perform. So there's not enough crew members on orbit that with enough hours in a day to actually do the research that we've got there. So there's actually an advantage of us getting the crew up there and increasing the crew size back to 6 and getting back to the research tempo, because we're in space to do something, and that's to do research. So I think at this point we don't see a need to slip it. There's the supplies are adequate on orbit, the food is there, and the research to be done needs to be done. So I think there's still a compelling need to move forward. Now, the only thing I would add is that we still need to go through the flight readiness review process. We still need to understand the progress failure that occurred, and we need to make sure that that progress failure doesn't cross over into the Soyuz launch vehicle that launches crew. And that review is still in front of us. Mike's got some reviews scheduled in the middle part of July. I have some reviews right after his, and then we'll head up to the launch on the 23rd. But from an overall space station standpoint, it seems prudent to just keep moving forward and keep doing what we're supposed to do in space, and that's to do the research. And I think it's really important for the space station. We're really learning a lot now, and we're really starting to turn a new page in doing research and providing data back to folks here on the Earth. So we need to keep doing that and keep moving forward. So I'll see if Mike wants to add anything else.
Well, I would just add, like Gerst, I mean, we fly space station not just to study the human's ability to survive in a microgravity environment in preparation for exploration, which is very important, but we're there to do research across the board. So therefore, the question we ask ourselves every day is the system able to support the crew? If the system's able to support the crew, then we get on with doing the job at hand, which is research. So the system is well able to support the crew, as I told you beforehand. We have well into October, probably late October, if nothing else flew. We have plenty of opportunity for resources to come to ISS to keep the crew going, and so therefore we should continue, because without the crew, then we can't get our logistics vehicles there. With a limited crew, we have a very difficult time doing some of the repairs we have to do to keep the systems going so we can do the research. We are not in a position today to stand down on crew flights. In fact, we're quite healthy on orbit, but we're always in a safe position if the time comes and we decide we don't have the logistics to support the crew. We always have a vehicle there that can bring them home safely, and we would certainly do that. But we're not even close to that kind of conversation today, given the logistics we have on board.
We'll take one more question on the phone, then come back to the room. Ken Chang of the New York Times.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Elon tweeted that it looked like it was an overpressurization in the second stage oxygen tank. And it looked like there was two events. There was a cloud and then a disassembly. I was wondering if you can provide any more details.
I'm sorry, I don't have any more data than that. I've got teams of folks looking at every possible telemetry, or every possible piece of telemetry and data. I don't want to speculate as to what happened. We did have, as I mentioned in my opening, we did have a pressurization event on the second stage. We don't yet know root cause of that. So that's all we've got. Sorry. Elon tweeted it. That's all I know.
Okay, question here.
Jason Ryan for SpaceflightInsider.com. Earlier this month, the Senate Appropriations Committee voted to cut the commercial crew budget, and I was hoping either Gerst or maybe Mike could answer the question of whether or not this might play for those members who made this vote, give them argument, basically ammo for their argument.
Yeah, I can take a shot at that and try to answer. Again, I think it's really important in this business that we keep moving forward. And so when I look at the budget situation, we really need full funding for crew. There's a technical problem and then there's a financial problem. And I can guarantee you that if what we're trying to do is very, very difficult technically, and you've seen that through the losses of 3 spacecraft from 3 different providers, from Orbital, from the Russian government, and then now from SpaceX. That shows you how difficult this technical problem is, and we really need funding at the level we requested at to let that technical work keep moving forward. When we get cut back in funding, then that slows down the technical work or compresses the amount of technical work that needs to be done in the amount of time, and we want to get a redundant capability to deliver crew to space as soon as we can get that, so we're not solely dependent upon the Russians. So we need that funding at the level we've requested so we can get that work moving forward. If we don't get the funding, we can't do the technical work. The technical work gets delayed or compressed, and this environment is not conducive to letting us compress or delay technical work. We need the time to work the technical items. We need the time to work the difficult engineering problems in front of us, and to do that, we need the funding at the levels we needed. So we need to fund at that right level between the funding and the technical work to match them. And the plan that we've provided through the budget process is what we need in 16. We need that full funding to keep the technical work moving forward. It's not right to delay from a funding standpoint and think you'll catch up later technically. We really need to keep moving forward technically, and to do that, we need the funding level we requested.
Thank you. Next question over here.
Dan Billow from WESH TV. I'd like to address my question both to Gwen Shotwell and Bill Gerstenmaier and request an answer from both of you on this, if I may. Was a destruct signal sent from the ground or received by the launch vehicle after the initial breakup began?
I don't believe there was a destruct signal, but I will follow up on that. I've heard no indication that there was a destruct signal.
Okay, we'll take one more in the room and then go back to the phone.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com with a question for Michael Suffredini. Given that you do have a progress going up on Friday, is there anything from this flight or replacement part from this flight or anything of priority that you would try to rush to Florida to get on board, if that is a possibility? And there was mention at the start of a water filtration issue on the station that you were flying a replacement bed. Is that something that you might want to get onto station sooner? And can you give a few more details about what that issue is?
Sure, I can address both. Like I said, our Russian colleagues have loaded the Progress up with food and water and other crew provisions, and that's really very important to us as a collective. And so for us, they're in good shape. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that is so important that we'd want to rush it to our Russian colleagues. I'm sure we'll talk about it here in the next few hours, see if there's anything there we'd like to do. It would have to be small, but overall we're in very good shape on orbit, and so there's nothing I can think of right now that we'd want to go get on the Progress at this point. To answer your question about water filtration, yes, on orbit we have a water filtration system, and we monitor its capability by checking the water constituents on a regular basis. The multi-filtration beds we have in the water processor today are starting to get full, as indicated by the measurements we've been taking lately. When it starts to get full, we take water samples and bring them home to understand specifically what the constituents are. The constituents in the water are not a risk to the crew at the levels that we see today. So we are reaching the limit where we would say we'd stop using the water processor. I expect that we have some flexibility in that number, and we'll be working that over the next little while because we know what the constituents are specifically that are making the total organic number go up higher. And so I expect we have some more runtime left on that the water processor. If we don't use the water processor, the water situation is about like the food. It can last a little bit longer than the food. So if we have no water processor at all, we're okay on water as well. The HTV itself is loaded heavily with water, so we'll get quite a bit when the HTV shows up. And again, the Progress is bringing up water. unfortunately for us, this was the second set of multi-filtration beds that we lost, and we just don't have that fast of a pipeline. So the team is off building up the next set of multi-filtration beds. I doubt very seriously we'll have them ready in time for the August flight of the HTV, but we'll work it really hard and see how quickly we can get them to orbit. But again, the situation, like I said, is we're in good shape because we store quite a bit of processed water on board as well to protect for this particular anomaly.
We'll go to another question on the phone from Frank Mooring of Aviation Week.
Thank you. This is for Bill Gerstenmaier. You have redundant capability to get to the station with cargo, but both of your vehicles are down now. Could you give us an update on the return to flight of the other vehicle, the orbital ATK vehicle, both in terms of its upcoming mission on Atlas and then returning to flight on the Antares? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of orbital and ATK, we've been working pretty extensively with them, and they've worked very well with the United Launch Alliance to get on the Atlas V for this fall. As Mike said earlier in this press conference, that they're currently scheduled in December. Again, the launch manifest kind of compressed us into December. We'll work with United Launch Alliance and work with Orbital ATK and see when the right time to fly that flight is. If we can advance a little bit from December and the manifest lets us do that, we might want to do that maybe as early as October. We'll work with the teams to see and ready to go fly. And again, there's been very good technical progress between Orbital ATK and United Launch Alliance. There's an adapter that they had to complete. There's some couple loads analysis, some modal analysis they needed to do with the Cygnus on top of the Atlas V, and then that's moved along fairly well. Again, we're making pretty good progress for Orbital ATK returning to flight on an Antares. The engine work has been completed in Russia. The Orbital ATK team has picked a new engine for that rocket, the RD-181. The pad repairs are going well at at Wallops. And that activity's occurred very well, and the pad repair is coming along, and we should support some test flights probably towards the end of this year, or a test firing of the Antares rocket with an anticipation that the Antares rocket probably comes back to flight sometime next spring. So again, I think that the teams have done a remarkable job of working together. There's been a lot of resourcefulness shown for the orbital team to go look and find another launch vehicle and to reach out to United Launch Alliance. And because of their experience in flying satellites on a variety of different launch vehicles, they were able to show that they could put the Cygnus on top of an Atlas V and get ready to support this fall. So, we didn't know how important it would be for them to return and add redundancy back in our cargo resupply chain, but it turns out that, again, their creativity and working with other providers to get another launch vehicle will turn out to be, I think, very beneficial to us. So again, I think you can see the benefit of this strategy of where we have multiple providers, we have robustness, and then it also shows the ingenuity and the cleverness of the teams to work together to overcome problems. So again, I think as you've heard through this press conference, these events are hard for us. Failure is not easy. It is not easy watching things not go right. Every launch is a risk to us, but again, the exciting thing is when you see the teams overcome this failure, learn from this failure, put it behind them, and actually improve and get better. That's the way that things work better. So again, the overall ATK orbital plan looks solid with a flight potentially this fall and then return back to Antares next spring.
Okay, next we have a reporter from space.com on the phone.
Yes, thank you. I guess for Bill and Mike, can you give us specific time frames on through when is the crew on the ISS supplied, and with the Progress supply mission coming up, how far will those supplies extend that date?
Let's see. We use very specific dates when we start talking about food and water and logistics, and so we show a date in October, but the way we consume food, the way we consume water, and the conservatism we put in our numbers, we could go to the end of October. I would expect that the progress will probably add about a month to that.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Eric Berger from the Houston Chronicle on the phone.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks so much for doing this on short notice. Question for Gerst. Given some of the congressional skepticism about SpaceX and the budget shortfalls that you addressed earlier regarding commercial crew, does this in any way push NASA closer to a leader-follower model in terms of crewed flights to the station, or are you confident you can press forward with two options?
Again, I mean, if you go back to our original philosophy of why we chose two to begin with, I think that philosophy is still sound. It's really important to have two developers working for the crew capability at the same time in parallel. The leader-follower, that negates the benefit of having the two operating in parallel. And again, I think it's very difficult to pick a winner in this situation, or to pick the one that has the technical advantage over the other. You know, as you can see through these three failures, here's, again, as I stressed to you before, here's three separate entities, all of which have experienced a failure, a very different failure, but they've all experienced failures. And who would have ever predicted that we would have lost these three vehicles in this particular order? And to do a leader-follower, you have to have enough ability to forecast, to predict who is the real leader and who's the follower with certainty. And I think the events of these three losses shows us how difficult this environment is and how difficult it is to make that prediction. So this approach we have of having the two providers working essentially, or two developers working in parallel, the Boeing CST-100 and the Dragon, that is the right approach, and we need to stay with that approach if we want to have ultimate success for commercial crew.
Take another question from here in the room.
Hi, Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. A couple of questions. One for Mike. Dragon is your only vehicle to get down significant down mass. Can you talk about that side of it? Is there a lot of research on board, things you need back to repair, look at? How does this impact that? And also maybe for Gwen, has there been any debris recovered, or is there an effort to survey the ocean for any debris that you might be able to fish out? Thanks.
Let's see, I'll do the first. One of the big things we worry about is our freezers getting full. Fortunately, SpaceX 6 just recently departed and just about emptied their freezers for us. So from that aspect, we're in pretty good shape. I haven't looked to see the levels of how fast we're going to fill them up and when we're going to get full. Certainly, that'll be one of the things we look at because of that unique capability. We do have some hardware that we want to bring home at some point, but none of it's critical. Again, SpaceX 6 we had filled up. In fact, SpaceX 7 we were going to bring trash home on because we just didn't have that much hardware to return. So in that, from a return standpoint, we were in pretty good shape this flight, and which tells you that overall on orbit we're in pretty good shape. And that will be one of the things we look at when we start looking at our projections, is when we need the next SpaceX, and a big driver will be what you said, is to get some of the research home.
Another question for Gwen.
Yeah, I think there was a follow-up to me with respect to recovery. We did have a number of vehicles out there deployed for the recovery of the possible recovery of the first stage. We also had other assets out there looking at the flight. So we've redeployed them to what we believe to be the landing location, and if there is anything, we'll try to. If there is any debris, we'll try to bring it back. Obviously, anything that's found could be helpful in the investigation. So we obviously want to retrieve anything we possibly can. I don't have any word yet. We had a meeting just about an hour before this press conference, and we've got another technical discussion in about another hour. I'll know then whether we've arrived at the site and see if there's anything visible from which to go and try to recover. So you'll hear from us. Elon's leans pretty far forward in the tweets. What I do want to state again is that we're not going to speculate. We're not going to give information early only to have to kind of pull it back and say, nope, it wasn't that, it was something else. So I appreciate everybody's patience in our releasing data. We want to get you the information that is accurate.
Ken?
Hi, Ken Kramer from Universe Today and Northeast Astronomy Forum. I was also interested in the recovery as one question. Are you giving that a very high priority to recover debris as a way to aid the investigation? And for Mike or Bill, what is the ability to replace this IDA, and do you need two of them before you launch commercial crew, or is just having one of them sufficient? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll let Gwen answer first, then I'll answer your second question.
Yeah, Ken, so all the assets that we had available in the area we've deployed to, as I mentioned, the landing site. It certainly is a priority. Whether you find something that's going to be helpful or not is unclear, but certainly if there's something there, we do want to pick it up and examine it. Absolutely. It could be very helpful.
And to answer your question about IDA, so we have two. The second one was going to fly on SpaceX 9. Our overall plan is to have two docking ports and go back to what we call direct handover, where the replacement crew shows up while the other crew's still on orbit, and then they hand over to each other for about a week or so, and then the other goes home. But that's not mandatory, and so if by the time the commercial vehicles start to fly regularly to ISS, we need to. That will be our path until we get a second IDA up there. We have parts for a third IDA, and so we'll go look to see how quickly we can assemble that.
Our next question comes on the phone. Jerica Duncan from CBS Evening News.
Hi, I just had a question about the cost. Can you give us an estimate of just how much money it took to launch the Falcon 9 rocket?
We actually don't talk about costs publicly. So no, I don't have an estimate for the cost.
I think there was a... okay, we'll take one on the phone. Keith Cowing.
Yes, Keith Cowing. I have a question for Mike Suffredini. I was thinking back to my days in station when we were talking about logistics, and the whole idea of skip cycle came up, where you could endure, I guess it was 2 quarters, about 6 months of bad news, and then have another perhaps quarter sitting there. Are you roughly in that, still doing that sort of thing? And if so, where are you sort of in that nice to have zone where you don't really worry about getting worried about not having logistics?
Yeah, Keith, we've evolved a little bit from there, but we try to protect about 6 months of time on orbit. And what that means is if you have no means to get supplies up at about 45 days before you get to zero, that's when we get into the process of planning the return of the crew. And so today we're at about, give or take, about 4 months. As I mentioned in the pre-launch press conference, we're trying to get that back up to 6, but we're also trying to do research at the same time, and so we're balancing that. Our plan was to be up to 6 by roughly the end of this year. We'll go look to see what we can end up doing when the dust settles. But so we're at about 4 months today, and per the guidelines that we follow, if we approach the month and a half period and we don't have a logistics vehicle coming in the near term, even if we do, we'll start the planning for the return of the crew. And certainly if we didn't see any vehicles on the horizon today, we would be considering whether or not to fly the 3 crew that we have ready to go. But again, that's not the position we're in. We have 4 months of supplies on board, so we'll fly the crew. We have 2 or 3 vehicles lined up to come fly to ISS. And so I would expect us to continue to operate nominally, although we have some work to do now to recover some of the hardware and get some spares on board that we need.
We'll take a couple more in the room, then go back to the phones. I think there's one here.
Yeah, I'm Anya with RT America. My question is for Durst. You mentioned the need for more federal funding to reduce what you said was a dependency on Russia. I'm wondering if you could explain what your concerns are when it comes to that dependency.
Yeah, when I say dependency, we only have a single crew provider to space station, and again, as you can see, we benefit by having dissimilar redundancy. So it's very nice to have multiple providers to provide a capability or provide a need for a particular activity. So we would like to have a U.S. provider to augment the Russian crew transportation capability to and from stations. So that's what I meant by the fact that I wanted to kind of end our sole reliance on the Russians. And by that, what I mean is we want to have the ability to have crew come to station by two dissimilar means. One would be a U.S. provider, either both SpaceX and Boeing would be one of those, both of those would be providers, as well as a Russian entity. So we'd like to get to where we have essentially three means to get crew to and from space station.
Okay, we have one more in the room here.
This is Jay Patterson with CT News Junkie. This is for Mike. You mentioned earlier that one of the cargo that was lost was an EMU. How is that going to affect EVA planning and repairs and any of that type of stuff that you have on the horizon at the moment?
Well, we'll have to go look at it for certain. Our plan was to bring home another EMU 3011, which we had removed the pump from. So I suspect we'll have a conversation about just replacing the pump and keeping it on orbit a bit longer. We do have three EMUs today that are operational on board. And 3011, which doesn't have its pump installed. And so given the way we've been able to install the pumps, if we can get through this last anomaly with the pump that we just had, then I suspect we'll be fine with suits for a while, although we would like to get a couple of new units up there just because their life is getting kind of long for the ones that are on orbit.
Okay, our next question comes from the phone from Sophie Sanchez of the Huffington Post.
Hi, thank you. My question is for Gwen. Your previous launches have shared fuel tank videos in the tank, in the liquid oxygen tank. I'm assuming that was to capture some visual data regarding the behavior of liquid fuel. Have those videos revealed anything concerning? And was there a camera in the liquid oxygen fuel tank today?
We do have video in the first stage LOX tank, and that was to help us understand the characteristics of the LOX. I don't believe we had a camera in the second stage tank, and that's the one that we're focusing the investigation on right now. If we do have video data from the first stage that can give us any information, we'll obviously use it. We've got over 3,000 telemetry channels to be looking through data or to look at for data, including videos. So if there's something there, we'll find it. We're going to look at everything, of course.
Okay, another question from the phone, Miriam Kramer from Mashable.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my question. This is honestly for anybody that knows the answer, maybe Pam or Gwen, but I'm wondering how large of a debris field you're looking at now. So is there an estimate for how big it is? And that's it. Thank you.
I don't have an estimate for that right now. I can find out from my recovery team. Pam, I'm assuming if you knew one, you'd speak up.
Absolutely, Gwen. And as this is being a SpaceX-led Mishap investigation, I defer to whatever information you have because I don't have anything to the contrary or otherwise.
Okay, we'll take one more in the room over here.
Hi, I'm Christine Corbett-Moran. I'm a postdoctoral fellow, NSF Astronomy and Astrophysics fellow at Caltech, here with NASA Social. My question is for Gwen. The upcoming flight abort test, would that system have saved lives in the event of an anomaly similar to today's? And will commercial Dragon eventually have such abort capabilities to also save important commercial crew and experiments in the future?
Most definitely, the escape system slated for the second version of Dragon would have taken, or should have certainly have taken the astronauts to a safe place after an anomaly like this. In fact, it's designed to take a far more energetic event and get the astronauts safely away. As I mentioned in my opening, this was not a first stage. For all indications say that this was not a first stage issue. So the launch escape system would have been enormously helpful here for the astronauts. And I also mentioned that we did have Dragon telemetry after the event. So Dragon was transmitting and appears to have been healthy for at least some period of time.
Okay, thank you. That's all the time we have today. I want to extend a thank you to all of our panelists who took time out of responding to this to come talk to us about it. So thank you to Gwen Shotwell, Bill Gerstenmaier, Michael Safradini, and Pam Underwood. And thank you to everyone who joined us in the room, on the phones, on social media, online. As appropriate, SpaceX and NASA will be providing updates on our websites and on social media. And for those who may find any debris, please call 321-867-2121. Again, if you find any debris, please call the hotline 321-867-2121. You can always find all our information about the International Space Station at nasa.gov/station. Thank you.